November 8, 1917, 2:14 a.m. Inside the imposing walls of the Oberste Heeresleitung headquarters in Spa, Belgium. General Erich Ludendorff, Germany's de facto military dictator, sat hunched over a mahogany desk cluttered with intelligence reports from across the Atlantic. The amber glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across documents marked Amerikanische Kriegsindustrie, American War Industry. Ludendorff's weathered face twisted into what could only be described as a smirk as he read the latest assessments from German intelligence operatives in the United States. "Mein Gott," he muttered to his aide, Major Wilhelm Groener, who stood at attention beside the desk. "Look at these numbers, Wilhelm. The Americans claimed they would produce 45,000 aircraft in 1918. 45,000. Ludendorff's laugh was sharp, cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade. "We have been fighting this war for 3 years, and our entire aircraft production since 1914 barely reaches 40,000 machines. These Americans, they dream like children." Groener shifted uncomfortably, but Ludendorff was far from finished. He lifted another document, this one bearing the seal of the German embassy in Washington, D.C., dated just 6 days earlier. "And here, Wilhelm, they speak of raising an army of 4 million men. 4 million! From a nation that could barely muster 200,000 regulars when they declared war on us in April. It is laughable. Absolutely laughable." The German General Staff had good reason for its confidence. By November 1917, the German war machine had proven its terrifying efficiency against the combined might of Britain, France, and Russia for over 3 years. German U-boats had sunk over 6 million tons of Allied shipping in 1917 alone. German artillery had reduced Verdun to a moonscape of craters and corpses. German poison gas had choked the life from hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers. German machine guns had mowed down British battalions like wheat before a scythe on the Somme. But it was Germany's industrial might that truly filled Ludendorff with confidence. The Krupp works in Essen had become a city unto itself, employing over 170,000 workers who labored around the clock to feed the German war effort. Every day, Krupp's furnaces belched forth enough steel to build 6 destroyers, or forge 400 artillery pieces, or manufacture 5 million rifle rounds. The numbers were staggering. Since 1914, German factories had produced over 64,000 machine guns, 30,000 artillery pieces, and 15 billion rounds of ammunition. Ludendorff set down the American intelligence report and walked to the massive map of the Western Front that dominated the far wall of his office. Red pins marked German positions stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, an impregnable line of concrete bunkers, barbed wire, and machine gun nests that had held firm against every Allied assault for 3 long years. "The Americans," he said, tracing his finger along the map, "they have no conception of what modern war demands. They think they can simply load their country boys onto ships and sail across the Atlantic to play soldier." What Ludendorff and his colleagues failed to grasp was that across the Atlantic, something unprecedented in human history was beginning to unfold. In the sprawling industrial cities of Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Chicago, American factories were undergoing a transformation that would make Germany's vaunted war production look like a cottage industry. At the Ford Motor Company's Rouge River plant in Dearborn, Michigan, Henry Ford himself stood before a gathering of his top engineers on November 15, 1917, just 1 week after Ludendorff's dismissive assessment. "Gentlemen," Ford announced, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had revolutionized automobile manufacturing, "the government has asked us to produce Liberty aircraft engines. They want 5,000 engines by the end of 1918. I told them we'll give them 15,000. The engineers exchanged glances. Ford's assembly line techniques had already reduced the time needed to build a Model T from 12 hours to 93 minutes. Now he was proposing to apply those same revolutionary methods to aircraft engine production. Within months, the Rouge River plant would be retooled with 7,000 new machine tools operated by 40,000 workers laboring in 3 shifts around the clock. Every 40 minutes, a completed Liberty engine would roll off Ford's assembly line. Engines that would power American bombers deep into the heart of Germany. But Ford was just the beginning. In Akron, Ohio, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company was constructing what would become the largest building in the world, a dirigible hangar stretching over 1,175 feet in length and 325 feet in width. Inside this cathedral of American industry, workers would construct massive airships for convoy escort duty while simultaneously producing 50,000 aircraft tires per month. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, the Remington Arms Company was expanding its ammunition production facilities to manufacture 6 million rifle cartridges per day, more than the entire German ammunition output for the first 6 months of the war. The scale of American mobilization defied comprehension. In Pennsylvania, the Bethlehem Steel Corporation was completing construction of the largest armor plate mill in the world, capable of forging battleship armor thick enough to stop German naval shells. The mill's massive steam hammers, weighing 15,000 tons each, could forge steel plates 18 inches thick and 50 feet long. Every blow of these hammers produced enough armor plating to protect an entire American battleship. Meanwhile, in the shipyards of Newport News, Virginia, workers were laying the keels of new cargo vessels at a pace that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The Emergency Fleet Corporation, established by Congress in April 1917, had set a target of 3 million tons of new shipping by the end of 1918. American shipbuilders would exceed that target by 300%, launching over 9 million tons of new vessels. In a single year, more shipping than Germany had managed to sink in their most successful year of submarine warfare. Back in Germany, intelligence reports of American industrial expansion were beginning to filter back to Berlin, but the German High Command dismissed them as Allied propaganda. On December 12, 1917, Kaiser Wilhelm II himself attended a briefing at the Oberste Heeresleitung, where Major Nicolai, head of German military intelligence, presented the latest assessments of American capabilities. Mein Kaiser, Nicolai reported, consulting his notes, American claims of industrial expansion appear greatly exaggerated. Our operatives report that while the Americans are indeed expanding their factories, they lack the skilled workforce necessary for efficient war production. It takes years to train a skilled machinist or artillery specialist. The Americans seem to believe they can transform farm boys into industrial workers overnight. Wilhelm nodded approvingly. Of course, they cannot. German industrial supremacy was built over decades of careful development. Our workers are the finest in the world, trained in traditions stretching back to the great craftsmen of the Middle Ages. These Americans, with their crude mass production methods, cannot possibly match the precision and quality of German manufacturing. The Kaiser's confidence was not entirely misplaced. German industrial workers were indeed among the most skilled in the world, and German manufacturing had long been synonymous with precision and quality. German optics companies like Zeiss produced rangefinders and periscopes of unmatched accuracy. German chemical companies had created synthetic dyes, explosives, and fertilizers that dominated global markets. German machine tools were considered the finest available, sought after by manufacturers from London to Moscow. But the Germans fundamentally misunderstood the nature of American industrial innovation. What they dismissed as crude mass production methods was actually a revolutionary approach to manufacturing that prioritized efficiency and volume over traditional craftsmanship. American factories were being designed not to produce the most elegant machine guns or the most precisely machined artillery shells, but to produce vast quantities of reliable, standardized equipment that could arm and equip millions of soldiers. At the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, Army ordnance officers were implementing production techniques that would have horrified traditional German weaponsmiths. Instead of having skilled craftsmen hand-fit each component of a rifle, American engineers had designed the M1917 Enfield rifle with interchangeable parts manufactured to such precise tolerances that any barrel could be fitted to any receiver, any bolt to any rifle. This seemingly simple innovation meant that a single factory could produce 2,000 rifles per day, using workers who had never touched a gun before the war began. The transformation was equally dramatic in artillery production. At the Watertown Arsenal, outside Boston, American engineers had designed an assembly line for 75mm field guns that reduced production time from 6 weeks per gun to 8 hours. Workers with just days of training could install gun sights, mount barrels, and attach wheels using standardized tools and fixtures. By early 1918, American factories were producing more artillery pieces in a single month than Germany had manufactured in all of 1914. Perhaps most remarkably, American industry was solving the ammunition crisis that had plagued the Allies since the war's beginning. European factories had struggled to meet the enormous demand for artillery shells. The British alone were firing 250,000 shells per day during major offensives. American factories approached the problem with characteristic directness. They would simply build more factories. Lots more factories. In Youngstown, Ohio, the Hazel Atlas Glass Company converted its bottle-making facilities to produce glass components for artillery shells. In Detroit, the Packard Motor Car Company retooled its luxury automobile assembly lines to manufacture aircraft engines and ammunition. In Akron, Ohio, tire manufacturers began producing gas masks and equipment belts. Across the industrial heartland of America, peacetime production was being systematically converted to war production on a scale that dwarfed anything previously attempted in human history. By January 1918, American factories were producing war materials at a rate that would have supplied the entire German army for a year. Every day, American production lines turned out 75,000 artillery shells, 15,000 rifles, 600 machine guns, 150 aircraft engines, and 50 million rounds of small arms ammunition. American steel mills were producing more armor plate in a week than German mills could manufacture in a month. American shipyards were launching more cargo vessels in a month than Germany's vaunted submarine fleet could sink in 3 months. But industrial production was only half the equation. The other half was manpower, and here too the Germans had severely underestimated American capabilities. When the United States declared war in April 1917, the regular army numbered just 128,000 men, smaller than the police force of New York City. The National Guard added another 181,000 men, but even combined, American military forces were dwarfed by the millions of battle-hardened veterans that Germany could field on the Western Front. General Ludendorff was well aware of these numbers, and they formed the basis of his confidence that American entry into the war would prove inconsequential. Even if the Americans managed to raise 1 million men, he told his staff in February 1918, they cannot transport them to Europe. Our U-boats will send them to the bottom of the Atlantic long before they reach French ports. Ludendorff's assessment seemed reasonable based on historical precedent. Moving large armies across oceans had always been an enormously complex undertaking. During the Napoleonic Wars, it had taken the British months to transport 30,000 men to the peninsula. During the Crimean War, it had taken the better part of a year to deploy 60,000 Allied troops to the Black Sea. The logistics of moving hundreds of thousands of men, along with their weapons, equipment, supplies, and horses, across 3,000 miles of ocean seemed almost insurmountable. But once again, the Germans failed to account for American industrial innovation and organizational efficiency. In Washington, D.C., General Peyton March, the new Army Chief of Staff, was implementing a mobilization plan that would have astounded military planners of previous generations. Using railway networks that had been decades in the making, the American military was preparing to move men and materials across the continental United States with unprecedented speed and efficiency. At Camp Devens in Massachusetts, newly constructed barracks could house 50,000 recruits, more soldiers than had served in the entire Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. At Camp Lewis in Washington State, another 50,000 men were learning to march, shoot, and fight using weapons produced in American factories just weeks earlier. Across the country, 32 new military training facilities had been constructed in less than 6 months, each capable of housing and training an entire division. The scale of American mobilization was breathtaking. In a single day in September 1917, over 687,000 American men had registered for military service under the Selective Service Act. By the end of the year, over 24 million men had registered, creating a pool of potential recruits larger than the entire population of most European nations. American recruiting stations processed over 10,000 new soldiers per day, equipped them with American-made uniforms, weapons, and equipment, and began their training using standardized procedures developed by American military planners. But the real test would come in moving these masses of men across the Atlantic. German U-boat commanders were confident that their submarines could disrupt any large-scale American troop movement. German submarine warfare had already demonstrated its devastating effectiveness against merchant shipping. In April 1917 alone, U-boats had sunk over 850,000 tons of Allied shipping, bringing Britain dangerously close to starvation. Admiral Reinhard Scheer, commander of the German High Seas Fleet, reviewed submarine patrol reports in his headquarters at Wilhelmshaven on March 15, 1918. The Americans have announced they will transport 500,000 men to France by the end of the year, he told his submarine commanders during their weekly briefing. This is impossible. Our U-boats will ensure it remains impossible. Scheer's confidence was not unfounded. German submarines had proven capable of sinking ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. Each U-boat represented a significant investment in German naval technology. Steel-pressure hulls capable of diving to 200 feet, diesel engines that could propel the boats at 17 knots on the surface, electric motors for silent underwater operations, and torpedoes that could sink the largest battleship with a single, well-placed hit. But American naval planners had developed countermeasures that would neutralize the U-boat threat through sheer overwhelming numbers. Instead of trying to escort individual merchant vessels across the Atlantic, the U.S. Navy implemented a convoy system that grouped dozens of ships together under the protection of destroyers, cruisers, and submarine chasers. American shipyards were producing convoy escort vessels so rapidly that German submarines would soon find themselves outnumbered by American warships patrolling the Atlantic shipping lanes. The first large-scale test of American transportation capabilities came in June 1918, when the largest convoy in military history departed from New York Harbor. 47 ships carrying over 100,000 American soldiers steamed out of New York Harbor in a formation that stretched over 20 miles from the lead destroyer to the last transport. German submarines detected the convoy 400 miles east of Newfoundland, but found themselves facing a screen of 23 American destroyers equipped with depth charges, hydrophones, and rapid-fire guns U-156, under the command of Kapitänleutnant Richard Felt, managed to penetrate the destroyer screen and fire 2 torpedoes at the transport ship Moldavia. Both torpedoes missed their target, and within minutes, 4 American destroyers were racing toward U-156's position with depth charges ready. Felt was forced to dive to 180 feet and remain submerged for 8 hours, while American destroyers dropped over 200 depth charges in the area. When UB-156 finally surfaced after dark, the convoy had disappeared over the horizon, carrying its cargo of American soldiers safely toward French ports. This scene would be repeated dozens of times throughout 1918, as American convoy after American convoy successfully crossed the Atlantic despite increasingly desperate German submarine attacks. American shipbuilders were launching new transport vessels faster than German submarines could sink them, while American naval yards were producing escort destroyers in numbers that overwhelmed German U-boat capabilities. By July 1918, American troop transports were crossing the Atlantic with almost casual efficiency. The USS America, converted from a German passenger liner seized in New York Harbor, could carry 8,000 soldiers in a single voyage. The USS Leviathan, another converted German liner, could transport 12,000 men with equipment and supplies for a month-long voyage. These floating cities, protected by flotillas of American destroyers, carried more soldiers across the Atlantic in a single convoy than many European armies could field for an entire campaign. General Ludendorff received increasingly alarming reports of American troop arrivals throughout the summer of 1918. On August 3rd, German intelligence reported that over 250,000 American soldiers had landed in French ports during the month of July alone. On August 15th, the number had risen to 300,000. By August 30th, German estimates indicated that over 1.2 million American soldiers were now serving in France. More men than Germany had deployed for the invasion of Belgium in 1914. The impact on German morale was devastating. German soldiers who had fought confidently against British, French, and Russian forces for 4 years suddenly found themselves facing fresh American divisions equipped with the latest weapons and supported by seemingly unlimited supplies of ammunition, food, and medical equipment. German prisoners of war reported that American artillery barrages lasted for hours without interruption. American machine gunners seemed to have unlimited ammunition, and American supply trains brought fresh equipment to the front lines every day. At the Battle of Belleau Wood in June 1918, German machine gunners watched in amazement as American Marines advanced across open ground despite taking heavy casualties, only to be replaced by fresh waves of attackers armed with identical weapons and equipment. German officers reported that destroying American equipment seemed pointless. Within hours, new American units would arrive with identical weapons, vehicles, and supplies. "It is like fighting against a machine," wrote Hauptmann Klaus Weber, a German artillery officer, in a letter to his wife dated July 20, 1918. "We destroyed 10 American guns, and 20 appear to replace them. We capture 100 American rifles, and 200 more are brought up from their supply dumps. We have been fighting for 4 years, Klaus, and we are tired. These Americans, they fight like they have unlimited everything. Unlimited shells, unlimited rifles, unlimited men." Weber's observation was more accurate than he realized. American factories were indeed producing unlimited quantities of war materials by historical standards. Every month, American production lines turned out enough rifles to arm 6 German divisions, enough artillery shells to supply a major offensive, and enough machine guns to equip an entire army corps. American steel mills were producing more metal in a week than Germany's entire iron and steel industry could manage in a month. The psychological impact of American industrial might was equally important. German soldiers had spent 4 years believing that their nation's industrial supremacy would ultimately ensure victory in the war. German propaganda had consistently emphasized the superiority of German manufacturing, German engineering, and German technology. The sight of endless streams of American equipment flowing to the front lines undermined this fundamental belief and called into question everything. German soldiers had been told about their nation's capabilities. By September 1918, the transformation was complete. What had begun as German dismissal of American industrial capacity had evolved into stunned recognition that American production capabilities exceeded those of all the Central Powers combined. American factories were producing war materials faster than German forces could destroy them. American shipyards were launching vessels faster than German submarines could sink them. American training camps were producing soldiers faster than German machine guns could kill them. The numbers told the story. In September 1918, there were over 1.8 million American soldiers serving in France, an army larger than the entire German force that had invaded Belgium in 1914. These 1.8 million men were equipped with over 2 million American-made rifles, supported by 15,000 American-manufactured machine guns, and backed by 4,000 pieces of American-produced artillery. Behind them stood supply, lines stretching back to American factories that could replace every piece of equipment. Within weeks of its destruction, American industrial production had reached levels that defied comprehension. In a single month, September 1918, American factories produced enough military equipment to outfit 50 German divisions. American ammunition plants manufactured enough artillery shells to supply every gun on the Western Front for 3 months. American aircraft factories delivered enough airplanes to replace the entire German Air Force twice over. The German High Command finally began to grasp the magnitude of their miscalculation. During the final weeks of the war, in his memoirs, published after the armistice, General Ludendorff would write, "We had calculated that American industrial capacity would require 2 years to reach significant production levels. We believed that American inexperience in modern warfare would limit their effectiveness, even if they managed to transport substantial forces to Europe. We were wrong on both counts. The Americans achieved in months what we had assumed would take years, and their inexperience was more than compensated by the sheer overwhelming quantity of men and materials they brought to bear." The final irony was that German intelligence had actually provided accurate assessments of American capabilities from the beginning. Reports filed by German agents in American cities throughout 1917 and early 1918 had correctly identified the massive expansion of American war production, the unprecedented scale of American military mobilization, and the revolutionary efficiency of American transportation and logistics systems. These reports had been dismissed by the German High Command as Allied propaganda or American exaggeration. On November 8, 1918, exactly 1 year after Ludendorff had laughed at American industrial claims, German delegates crossed the front lines to negotiate an armistice with Allied commanders. The delegation was led by Matthias Erzberger, a German politician who had spent the war years assuring his colleagues that American entry into the conflict would prove inconsequential. As Erzberger's automobile passed through the American lines, he was stunned by the scale of American military preparations visible on all sides. American supply dumps stretched for miles, filled with equipment and supplies that exceeded anything he had seen in 4 years of war. American artillery parks contained more guns than the entire German army had possessed at the war's beginning. American motor pools displayed thousands of trucks, ambulances, and staff cars that demonstrated an industrial capacity beyond German comprehension. "Mein Gott," Erzberger whispered to his aide as they drove past an American ammunition dump containing over 2 million artillery shells stacked in neat rows. How did we not see this coming? The answer was simple but devastating. The German High Command had measured American capabilities by European standards, failing to recognize that American industry operated according to entirely different principles. Where European factories emphasized quality and precision, American factories prioritized quantity and standardization. Where European military planning focused on professional armies and limited objectives, American planning envisioned citizen armies and unlimited resources. Where European industrial capacity had been developed over decades of careful expansion, American industrial capacity could be created in months through revolutionary manufacturing techniques. The final statistics of American industrial mobilization would not be compiled until after the war's end, but they revealed the true magnitude of what had been accomplished. Between April 1917 and November 1918, American factories had produced over 4 million rifles, 180,000 machine guns, 64,000 artillery pieces, and 20 billion rounds of ammunition. American shipyards had launched 12 million tons of new shipping. American aircraft factories had delivered over 15,000 airplanes. American chemical plants had manufactured more explosives than all other combatant nations combined. Most remarkably, American industry had accomplished this unprecedented expansion while simultaneously maintaining production of civilian goods, feeding and supplying the American population, and supporting allied nations through loans and material assistance. German industry, operating under total war conditions since 1914, had never approached American production levels even. During its peak years of 1916 and 1917, the 2 million American soldiers who crossed the Atlantic represented more than just military manpower. They represented the industrial might of a nation that had transformed itself from a regional power to a global superpower in the space of 18 months. Each American soldier carried equipment that demonstrated the revolutionary efficiency of American mass production. Each American unit was supported by supply lines that showcased the organizational genius of American logistics. Each American division was backed by industrial resources that dwarfed the entire economic output of most European nations. When the armistice took effect at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918, General Ludendorff was no longer laughing at American industrial claims. In his final dispatch to the German High Command, he wrote, "The American industrial mobilization has exceeded our most pessimistic projections by orders of magnitude. Their capacity to produce men and materials appears virtually unlimited. Continuation of the war under these circumstances would result in the complete destruction of German military forces within months." The transformation was complete. What had begun with German contempt for American industrial capacity had ended with German recognition that American production capabilities exceeded those of all European powers combined. The 2 million doughboys who crossed the Atlantic had been equipped, supplied, and transported by an industrial machine that had accomplished in 19 months what European nations had assumed would require a generation to achieve. In the end, the German High Command's greatest miscalculation was not military or strategic, but psychological. They had assumed that American democracy would prove too disorganized to mount an effective war effort, that American capitalism would prove too chaotic to sustain massive industrial mobilization, and that American society would prove too individualistic to support the collective sacrifice required for modern warfare. Instead, they discovered that American democracy could mobilize resources with unprecedented efficiency, that American capitalism could coordinate production on an unimaginable scale, and that American society could unite behind a common cause with devastating effectiveness. The laughter that had echoed through German headquarters in November 1917 had been replaced by stunned silence in November 1918. The 2 million American soldiers serving in France represented more than military defeat. They represented the emergence of a new kind of industrial power that would reshape the global balance of power for generations to come. The nation that the German High Command had dismissed as a collection of farmers and factory workers had proven capable of industrial mobilization that exceeded the combined efforts of centuries-old European powers. As German soldiers laid down their weapons and began the long march back to Germany, many reflected on the overwhelming material superiority that had ultimately defeated them. They had fought bravely against British professionalism, French determination, and Russian endurance. But they had been overwhelmed by American abundance, an abundance of men, materials, and industrial capacity that had proven impossible to overcome through military skill alone. The war had ended, but the lesson was clear. In the industrial age, victory would belong not to the nation with the finest soldiers or the most brilliant generals, but to the nation with the greatest capacity to produce the tools of modern warfare. And in that contest, American industry had proven supreme beyond all European calculation.